Good afternoon, everyone. I draw your attention. My name is Hilary McGrady. I'm the Director General of the National Trust. I'm really delighted to be able to welcome you all here today. We're here to talk about nature-based solutions, and in particular, can everybody hear me? Can you put your hand up if you can hear me? Oh, you can. Excellent. Yes, we're here to talk about nature-based solutions, what they mean, how can we get a collective view about what they mean and how they might actually be delivered then in practice. I'm joined by a really great panel today to talk through their own experience and their own sort of thinking behind this and importantly, how it is actually starting to be delivered on the ground. Before I introduce them, just to tell you a little bit about the National Trust, I'm sure some of you are familiar with us. We're described as the largest conservation charity in Europe. We look after 750,000 miles of coastline, 250,000 acres of land of all different types, upland, lowland, everything in between, and over 500 historic houses, which make up the landscape and in many ways express the history of the UK. The National Trust in the UK is only one of a very wide network, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined with many of our fellow National Trusts around the world who form part of our international National Trust organisation INTO. As I said, I'm joined by a really great panel who will all be adding their areas of expertise, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Can I start with you?
Professor of Biodiversity and Director of the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative at the University of Oxford.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm lovely to meet you today. My name is Zoe Kiros-Cullen. I'm the Director of Climate and Nature Linkages at Fauna and Flora International.
And hello, my name is Ben McCarthy. I'm Head of Nature Conservation and Restoration Ecology at the National Trust.
Hello, I'm Stuart Brooks. I'm the Head of Conservation and Policy at the National Trust for Scotland. I chair the IUCN UK Peatland programme and sit on the steering group for the Global Peatlands Initiative.
At the end, and I'm finding it hard because I've got so much noise in my head, is Catherine Leonard, who's the Chief Executive of the International National Trust. Is everyone else struggling to hear? Yeah. Guys, this isn't working. It's just, yeah. It's just, sorry, two minutes. Yeah. I can't even hear myself think because the noise, background noise is so loud. There's nothing you can do about that. Okay. Catherine, one last time.
Speak loud.
Okay, try and speak loudly. Catherine, do you want to give it one more go?
Right, that's working, fabulous. So, for the third time, I'm Catherine Leonard, the Secretary General of INTO, the International National Trusts Organisation.
Thank you, finally. Excellent. Good, so by way of getting the conversation underway, I mean, the starting point really is, what do we mean by nature-based solutions? And I'm going to pass over to Professor Natalie. Can you just talk a little bit about the background to the research that was done at Oxford and how we're trying to apply it?
I think I've got some slides. So yeah, should I come up there and show the slides? Should we swap around? Can everyone hear me okay? It's a little bit of background noise, isn't there? But hopefully you'll be able to hear me. Great. So sorry, let me swap. Technical issues. No. So it's not appearing here, which is not too much of a problem for me. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay. Let's get going then. So yeah, I just want to give a sort of a bit of a high-level introduction to this session. Okay, not yet. In a minute, I will.
It's a lot clearer.
Is it? Okay. All right. Okay, is that clear, everyone? Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, the background noise is kind of coming in and out. It's gone now. Are we good? Okay, brilliant. Right, let's talk about nature-based solutions. So, whoops, the slides are changing on their own. Okay, let's go back to that one. Right, now I'm starting. So the concept of a nature-based solution arises from the rich understanding that we have, both from science and also practice around the world, that healthy ecosystems support human communities all over the world in countless ways. From providing clean water, clean food, from protecting us from the impacts of climate change, to providing pollinators, pest control, all sorts of them, genetic resources, medicine, the list goes on and on. We're all really aware of that. And that awareness of that is infusing this event. The concept also arises from the fact that biodiversity loss and climate change do share some of the same critical drivers, and so therefore in theory should share some of the same solutions. So for example, on land, land use change through industrial agricultural commodity production is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss. Meanwhile, it's approximately the second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. So enhancing our carbon stores in our natural ecosystems and protecting, making sure that carbon is locked up in the biosphere can go some way towards both helping to address climate change whilst also protecting biodiversity. So put very simply, people always say, well, what is a nature-based solution? And it's worth sort of remembering what a nature-based solution is, because there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about this, with lots of activities being badged as nature-based solutions when they're not really, they don't really count, and we'll get back to what counts. But put very simply, nature-based solutions involve working with nature to address societal goals. They involve protecting, connecting, and restoring a diverse range of ecosystems on land, in the sea, so not just forests, wetlands, peatlands, and obviously we're going to be coming to peatlands, all those different ecosystems. It involves regenerating or sustainably managing our working lands, so our aquatic systems, our croplands, and our timberlands. And it also can, in certain circumstances, involve the creation of new ecosystems, and particularly I mean by bringing green and blue infrastructure into our cities. And so this concept of nature-based solutions, based on all this evidence that it can provide a win-win or a triple win, depending on who you're talking to, has meant that nature-based solutions have shot up, international business and public policy agendas. There's a huge amount of interest in them. And this is a good thing. We know that we can't meet the twin goals of the Paris Agreement without looking after our natural world, without making sure all that carbon stays in the biosphere. And we know that, properly implemented, properly designed, properly implemented, that working with nature can bring all these different sorts of benefits. And particularly, it can protect us from the impacts of climate change, and it can go some way towards helping cool the planet as well towards the end of the century. And I'll get back to that. But there's been a lot of concern, two main types of concern about nature-based solutions, and you'll hear that resonating around this space. In fact, I think there's a demonstration going on right now next to the Nature Pavilion, but there is great concern that nature-based solutions are being used by some high-emitting industries and governments as in greenwashing, so distracting or delaying urgent action to decarbonise the economy. That's sort of problem number one, and we'll get back to that. There's also concerns that there's been an overemphasis on tree planting as a silver bullet climate solution, and that this is having adverse impacts on biodiversity, where those tree plantations replace perfectly good, really carbon-rich biodiverse ecosystems like peatlands. That these tree plantations, especially if they contain single species of exotic species, they are risky non-permanent carbon stores. Generally speaking, they have low resilience to fire and other impacts of climate change. And there's examples all over the world where these sort of top-down implemented tree planting programs are actually having adverse impacts on local communities. So, as businesses and as governments try and integrate nature-based solutions into their climate approaches to climate and biodiversity, into their business models, into their accounting systems, it's vital that we, as a community of scientists and people with learning from practice, ensure that there are some really strict guidelines, guardrails if you want, I prefer to use the word guidelines, around what good looks like. How do we ensure that those investments in nature deliver for people, for biodiversity and carbon for the long term? So some time ago, a group of conservation organisations, development organisations critically, and scientific institutions initially across the UK got together to put together some four key guidelines about what good nature-based solutions look like, and what good investments in nature-based solutions look like. And these appeared initially in a letter that was written to Alok Sharma when his presidency of COP26 was announced. But then since then, we've been growing the number of signatories and working with the IUCN, because these guidelines are strongly aligned, of course, with the IUCN global standard for nature-based solutions. So I'm going to, again, as a background to this discussion, and not taking too long over it, so don't worry, go through what the four. So the first guideline is critically important. Nature-based solutions are not a substitute for the rapid phase-out of fossil fuels and must not delay urgent action to decarbonise the economy. So there's a lot of misinformation about the role of nature in climate change mitigation, not surprisingly, because it is very difficult, technically very difficult, to estimate the global or even national mitigation potential of restoring and protecting and sustainably managing our natural and semi-natural ecosystems. You have to take into account the price of carbon, all sorts of socioeconomic factors, political economy, governance, land tenure issues, never mind all the complexities and nuance around biophysical systems and their response to climate change. After that sentence, I realise it's a miracle we have any consensus at all, but we do have growing consensus that if we scale up nature-based solutions to the maximum extent possible on land, we can get around 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide less in the atmosphere. So it's a mitigation potential of 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Now, you'll often hear that that's approximately 30% of annual greenhouse gas emissions. I think talking about percentages is really misleading, because it somehow implies that you just get the 30% without maybe getting the 70% from decarbonisation, which you absolutely don't. We reframed this analysis in terms of the Paris climate goal, and we worked out that towards the end of the century, this is equivalent to the mitigation potential of nature-based solutions, equivalent to knocking about 0.3 degrees off peak warming. So if we peak at 2 degrees in 2075, then that's the sort of temperature reduction. Now that is a significant contribution, especially if you think about, you know, a 1.5 degree warmer world compared to a 2 degree warmer world. You know, there's a big difference there. However, it is a lot smaller than what must be achieved from decarbonisation. And the point is, and unless we keep fossil fuels in the ground, the resultant heating will undermine the capacity of the biosphere to be a net carbon sink. It will turn the biosphere into a net source of greenhouse gases. So we have to keep fossil fuels in the ground, and we have to restore nature to meet the twin goals of the Paris Agreement. And the science is really, really, really clear on that. So that's the science and the ideas underlining number one guideline. So this speaks to the need to ensure that those who are investing in nature-based solutions, whoever they are, that they are only doing so as well as doing everything they possibly can to decarbonise their operations as rapidly as possible. So we need to hold them to account. That speaks to sort of demand side integrity. Okay, the second guidelines is that nature-based solutions involve the protection of a wide range of ecosystems on land and in the sea. Big emphasis on forests, whereas we know that all these other ecosystems are kelp forests, or mangrove forests, or ancient grasslands, our salt marshes and our peatlands especially are incredibly important sources of sinks for carbon, as well as being home to biodiversity, and as well as being incredibly important for adaptation. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, quite a lot of projects that are incorrectly badged as nature-based solutions are, well, these projects are problematic in the sense that sometimes they distract from the urgent need to protect our intact ecosystems. So the number one thing we need to be doing is protecting our intact ecosystems, as that's where the carbon and biodiversity are, as those ecosystems are most resilient to the impacts of climate change. But we need to make sure that projects don't replace very, very important ecosystems such as peatlands. And we'll be learning more about peatlands, but you know They cover 3% of land area and yet have 42% of the soil carbon, yet are being threatened by plantations and agriculture and horticultural peat production and other things I'm sure you'll hear about. And the risk is that they're basically emitting greenhouse gases. So 6% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the drainage of peatlands, and some of that is associated with plantations incorrectly badged as a nature-based solution. So number 2 is very important, the integrity of them. Let's think about all ecosystems. Okay. The third one, so I mentioned this before, just in briefly, problem with plantation, short-term high-risk carbon stores, they're not resilient. The products are often short-lived, end up in incinerators and return the carbon to the air. And as I said before, some of the problems around this is that they distract from the urgent need to protect what we've got left, and critically important habitats not getting protected because funding and attention has been distracted away from them towards plantations and so forth. This is really a crucial third guideline, which is that nature-based solutions are designed, implemented, managed and monitored by or in partnership with local communities, farmers, indigenous people, through a process that fully champions and respects local rights and knowledge and generates local benefits. So the problem is where regulatory frameworks are weak, land often gets appropriated for so-called nature-based solutions projects, and this can lead, not only is this completely unethical, it also undermines the sustainability of those projects, because those communities often have the knowledge on how best to look after their ecosystems, and need to be incentivized and supported and empowered to look after them, which in many cases, in many parts of the world, they've been doing for millennia. And finally, we need to ensure that nature-based solutions support or enhance biodiversity. And by biodiversity, we don't mean wildlife. We mean the diversity of life from the level of the gene to the level of the ecosystem. We know from science that the more biodiverse an ecosystem, or the similar that ecosystem is to its natural state, the more resilient it is to fires, to pests, to pathogens, to floods, for droughts, and so forth. So that biodiversity is that which secures the flow of ecosystem services now and into the future. So we absolutely have to make sure that biodiversity underpins nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions are that which delivers for human health and well-being and for biodiversity, but biodiversity is also a foundational property of nature-based solutions. We have around 43 signatories, and these are signatories of organisations that have a lot of knowledge about how to work with nature. Initially, this was just a list of organisations within the UK, but we've been seeking signatories from the global conservation, science and research community. So if you are from one of those organisations, and if what I've said makes sense, then do please drop me a line and add your signature to it. Later this week and on Nature Day, we'll be releasing a platform that showcases best practice examples of nature-based solutions around the world. We're also launching 3 films about nature-based solutions in action in the UK, and peatlands feature fairly heavily in that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, and pass back over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Apologies, everybody. That was a bit chaotic at the start with noise and everything else. We are going to move to our next speaker, who is Ollie, who will be joining us, I think, on screen. Yes?
Hi.
Ollie. Hi, Ollie. So Ollie is the Senior Climate Change and Policy Officer from the RSPB, and we'll be talking really about how we are putting a lot of what Natalie has just talked through into action. Over to you, Ollie. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary, and good afternoon, everybody. And I'm sorry I can't be with you all in Glasgow. It really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for many of us, but hey-ho, here I am. And I've been asked to talk, as Hilary said, particularly about the first 2 of those NbS principles through the lens of peatlands in the UK. So get my slides are not moving yet. There we go. So the principle 1 was all about NbS are not a substitute for the rapid phase out of fossil fuels, urgent decarbonisation of our ways of life. So I'm just going to quickly run through greenhouse gas stores, greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas sequestration with peatlands, and slightly mischievously poses perhaps that the misuse of our peatlands has made peatlands a nature-based problem for which, of course, there is a solution as well. Peatlands, as we know, are a very important carbon store. RSPB calculations and mapping work that we've been developing over the last few years, and this is one of our maps from our first phase mapping, show that there are around 3 billion, I think it's 3.2 billion tonnes of carbon stored in the UK's peatlands. That's a phenomenal amount. Perhaps it's more realistic to look at the amount of carbon in the top 30 centimetres of those soils, because those are the soils, or that's the carbon that we're likely to lose in a realistic time frame for what we're talking about now over the next few decades. And that's still a really significant figure. It's actually rather significant. I've just noticed a typo on the slide. It's 554 million tonnes of carbon in the top 30 centimetres. That's a typo I'll correct afterwards. And that amount is equivalent to 4 years of the whole of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions equivalent. So that's in our top losable area of peatlands soil in the UK. To put that into context, it's 5% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. So again, a significant chunk, but a chunk that, as previously said, does not in any way defray from the need for urgent decarbonisation. And talking of decarbonisation, that's actually greater than the greenhouse gas emissions of the UK's heavy goods vehicle fleet, which comes in as around 20 million tonnes of CO2, whereas the peatland emissions are around 23 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. That's different, of course, from the carbon, which is 545 tonnes of carbon. This is CO2 equivalents. So it's really, really significant. Another way of looking at it, the Climate Change Committee has a target for woodland planting. If we didn't restore all our peatlands, or if we leave our peatlands as they are at the moment, we will actually lose the benefit, or 2 times the potential gain from those woodland planting targets. So again, overall, if we don't look at our peatland restoration, we're negating the benefits of having new trees. I think another key point about peatland restoration is that early restoration helps our overall carbon budget, because the climate change problem, of course, is about the accumulation of carbon, of CO2 in the atmosphere. The cumulative emissions from peatland are less if you start restoring earlier. And I think that's shown from this graph here, that if we get on and restore early, that actually has earlier benefits. And I think those early benefits are really, really to the problem that we're facing at the moment. As the little graphic on the right of this shows, we have around 7 or 8 years worth of greenhouse gas emissions at the global level left before the carbon budget, or the CO2 budget in the atmosphere, is met for a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. So it is really, really urgent that we stop these cumulative emissions as quickly as possible. Now, all that's about the problems, if you like, of CO2 and carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from peatlands. What about the sequestration benefit? It's quite clear that over large periods of time, peatlands do sequester carbon. That's why we have 3 billion tonnes of carbon stored in them. But it's a very complex situation to then say, are peatlands actually, do they play an important role in sequestering carbon from the atmosphere? The science here is quite complex, and it depends on carbon dioxide fluxes in both directions and CH2 methane fluxes as well. And it depends quite a lot on the habitat, where you are, so on and so forth. And so I've just run to the Natural England's recent carbon habitats report, which says, when in healthy condition, peatlands sequester carbon only slowly, but they are unique in that they go on doing so indefinitely. So it's very slow, but they continue indefinitely, whereas woodlands, of course, have a cap. The NE report also says that restoring the carbon sink function of peatlands is possible, though it may take decades, depending on the initial level of damage to a site. So I think here it's very important to be realistic about the role of peatlands in our atmospheric carbon and towards net zero. And the key thing is it's about reducing emissions and not claiming very much of a sequestration benefit. So in summary of principle one, can we use peatlands to the rescue for other greenhouse gas emissions elsewhere in the economy? Absolutely not, no. Are restoring peatlands, looking at peatland as a nature-based solution towards net zero? Absolutely yes, absolutely critical and important that we do as much as we can. So moving to principle two, which is about protection, restoration and management for nature-based solutions. And here I'm quickly going to run through the condition, extent and ambition for those things in the UK. And here clearly there's a good use, not a misuse. That's very clearly is a very important nature-based opportunity. So first of all, let's look at condition. And here, as we all know, who've been involved in peatland nature conservation for a long time, we've been concerned for decades about the appalling condition of the peatlands in the UK. Just under 80% are deemed to be in poor condition, and that's reflected in not just the overall condition, but in the condition of our sites of special scientific interest, our protected sites, which is absolutely, frankly, it's a national disgrace. Even on the European sites of European importance, the latest of JNCC's Article 17 reporting found only 360 square kilometres of our blanket area condition, nearly 10 times that, over 3,300 square kilometres, not in good condition. But even more staggering, over 18,000 kilometres where we're not actually sure what condition it's in. So I think we can assume that it's poor. That's looking at nature. If we look at carbon, going back to our RSPB's first phase peat mapping or carbon mapping, one of the starting things we discovered was that 66%, so that's 2/3 of the carbon in our nature-rich areas, is not in a protected area. So that really, really important carbon store has no recognition even of being important, let alone any kind of protection. So I pose the consideration that we perhaps should think of some kind of carbon protection designation to recognise these areas and look after them properly. Moving to restoration, well, we all know we've had some fantastic initiatives right across the UK in all 4 countries. And yet, again, this comes from the second phase of the RSPB's work. The contribution of all that tremendous work is actually really, really sobering. We've reckoned that only 4% of our peatlands have been restored since 1990. 76% in poor condition, 20% in a near natural condition. And I think that's really, really important to show the very welcome initiatives we're now, particularly in Scotland, with a 250 hectare commitment and 35,000 hectares in England up over the next 4 years. These are just small bites of what we actually need to do, and we absolutely need to ramp up restoration of our peatlands, probably tenfold in England and 4 or 5 times what we're doing in Scotland. And I'll remind, it's really important that we do this early so we stop those accumulating emissions in the atmosphere. We have targets, of course, to do this. We have the Committee on Climate Change wants as recommended that all upland peatlands should be restored ideally by 2045, by 2050 at the latest. The CCC sadly, unfortunately, forgotten about lowland raised bog habitat, which is also important, although obviously there's a lot less of it. We have a 2030 nature recovery target, and we have a 30 by 30 target, which it was nice to hear Prince Charles supporting has been critical to achieve on Monday at this conference. And even before we get to the detailed expense, practicalities, and the need to scale up our restoration, we should be stopping damaging habitat immediately. One of the key ones, of course, in our uplands is burning vegetation on peat soils. We can actually stop that pretty much now. And there's frameworks and ideas in place in the governments of both England and Scotland to do that. Well, let's get on and do that for the next before the next burning season starts on all peatlands, not just small areas of it. We talk a lot about mitigation because it's obviously key for peatlands, but I'm aware that actually this whole day is about adaptation too. So let's not forget that peatlands do have other nature-based solutions. And to illustrate this, I'll just talk about very briefly the RSPB's work at Dovestone in the Pennines, just east of Manchester, where we've been working for many years with United Utilities up there, blocking drains and gullies with heather and stone downs, replanting sodums, and all the restoration thing that happened. Why is United Utilities interested in this? They're interested in it as a nature-based solution for reasons to improve water quality, and the water that comes off a healthy peatland has 40% less coloration that they have to then treat, which obviously is costly than from a bare peat. So there's a huge financial benefit there to the water companies. It helps slow the water runoff from bare peat and enables a better catchment scale water management approach. It provides resilience to drought and resilience to wildfires. And it provides health benefits and recreation. Dovestone is a much visited area and engaging the public. And also in United Utilities NbS objectives, also reversing biodiversity loss, which is great to see. And of course, nature is integral to nature-based solutions. It's there in the name. And again, using Dovestone as an example, just 10 years after we started restoration work there, the populations of breeding wading birds had increased had doubled, twofold, had doubled. And indeed, dunlins, which had just disappeared before we started the restoration, had got back to 10 pairs breeding there in 10 years. So we can bring nature back pretty quickly is a really key message. So it's really important that every NbS project has nature integral to its objectives, integral to its monitoring and project design. And that's a really important point. Finally, thinking about managing our peatlands. For here, I'm going to switch for the example about lowland farmed peatland, which, although it's only 14% of the peatland area, it actually produces 56%, over half of the emissions from UK peatlands. And here we need a real transformation from wetland farming for economic use to develop water management at a landscape scale, and from using these areas as exploiting the peat soils to actually harvesting their natural benefits. All this is going to cost money. That's quite clear, and the ONS has put a cost of between 8 and 22 billion pounds over the next 100 years. But that will that will have a return on that investment for carbon alone of only 5 to 13 times that outlay of over 100 billion pounds. And that's not looking at the other benefits which aren't costed in this: nature, water management, recreation, tourism income, and so forth. So just to very quickly sum up, are peatlands a nature-based solution? Of course they are, but it's all about transformation from use to good use, harvesting peatlands' natural inherent benefits for climate, nature and people. The sooner we get on with this, the better. We've got the policies largely in place. The first phases of funding in most of our countries largely in place. We need to build on this, ramp up investment in people, equipment, knowledge, finance and new opportunities. Re-wetting is inevitable. Let's get on with it immediately and stop all the damaging peatlands and turn them into the beautiful, wonderful places they should be for nature, for climate and for people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ollie. I should have said at the start, we're going to have a question and answer at the end, so hopefully you'll be saving all of those questions up. But without further ado, we had wonderful local example there, but Zoe, you're going to give us an international case study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? Okay, fantastic. So I am going to present on work that our Indonesia program has been doing with partners in peatland areas. Using this opportunity to present on two different approaches to delivering nature-based solutions in practice, integrating the how we address the biodiversity and the social elements of the NbS guidelines in these two different governance scenarios. So I'm going to start with an example. So these are the two parts of the guidelines that I'm tasked with talking about, and I'm going to illustrate through these two examples in Indonesia. So the first is looking at a model which is privately financed in an ecosystem restoration concession structure, working in partnership with April, which is a company which many of you will be familiar with, who have established back in 2013 the ecosystem restoration in Riau, which essentially is an approach to recognizing that clearly peatlands and forests in Indonesia are critically important, vast resources, also the largest source of emissions come from this sector. So in terms of, sort of the national response to climate change, nature-based solutions have a huge role to play and are also an enormous opportunity in terms of shifting the trajectory of development in favor of great outcomes for climate, for nature and for people. And there are obviously different ways to approach this. This very much presents a protection and production scenario where production, which in this case is pulp and paper plantation, is integrated with protection and recognizing the critical importance of the high conservation value areas that are in the Kampar Peninsula in eastern Sumatra, two very significant peat domes, very deep peat between 3 and 15 meters, profoundly important from a climate perspective, but also very much at risk from conversion through fire, through agriculture, through illegal logging. So a lot of pressures in this landscape. So it's recognized that an ecosystem restoration concession model working to designate an area for the purposes of conservation and for restoration, but also working in a way that integrates with the local communities and those stakeholders living within and around those landscapes could be a really productive way forward for securing this area. So FFI partnered in this approach when the Ecosystem Restoration Riau was established back in 2013. And with the concession licenses, the area comprises 5 different concession licenses, which are designated specifically for conservation with license periods of 60 years, 4 of which are in mainland Kampar Peninsula and 1 of which is coastal on Padang Island, broadly securing this large area. Critically important area for biodiversity. It's a key biodiversity area, an IBA and a tiger conservation area. And clearly, in terms of the ecosystem service values, in terms of watershed protection, in terms of carbon storage, a vital landscape. So the concept really is around how the area can be secured through good management of the forests and the peatlands, and monitoring of those areas and integrating that with productive activity around the fringes, using the commercial plantation operations around the edges of the area, which is off deep peat, to act as a boundary, securing the area from further threats, reducing the risks of fire, but also engaging with communities in and around the area on no fire peat practices, for example, and looking at ways to secure re-wetting and restoring the landscape. So many different interventions happening within the area, looking at a sort of holistic approach to delivering NbS. So FFI's principal focus, we're a technical partner in the delivery of this work, particularly heavily focused on the baseline work relating to biodiversity, community and carbon stock. So we've been engaged since 2015 when the first biodiversity baseline survey was done. You can see that the biodiversity values, they speak for themselves. This is a species list dating from the original baseline survey, which was in a subset of the restoration concessions, illustrating the large numbers of species there. That's 550 species of plant and animal. That's risen with subsequent surveys to over 800 species. 40% of Sumatra's birds are represented in the area. 66 IUCN red-listed species, 4 out of 5 of Sumatra's cat species, including the Sumatran tiger. So a really critically important area. That list is likely to increase. We've just completed the baseline survey in the least accessible restoration concession. The results are sort of still pending on that. Alongside that, there's baseline carbon stock survey conducted as well, including sort of the above ground and clearly the most important in this landscape, the below ground. Which showed there's in excess of 2 billion tons of carbon stored within these two peat domes, 97% of which is below ground. It's sitting there in the peatland, which is a staggering amount for a really quite contained area of landscape. So moving on from, see if I can move the slide forward. Not coming. Thank you. I think it's coming. Anyway, so the next slide is really around the practices that are being put in place. What's been successful in terms of managing this area from a carbon and a sort of a habitat restoration point of view is a lot of the hydrological restoration which has taken place. I think we need to go back just a little bit. So you've got a sneak preview of the end. Can we loop back? Sorry. That's fine, thank you. Great. So yeah, in practice then, of course, there's the biodiversity work. Then there's the active management, which involves the rewetting of peat, the blocking of drainage canals. So far, 27 canal systems have been blocked, resulting in the rewetting of areas reaching approximately 9,000 hectares. A process of restoration of the forest areas where there is degradation, and that's across a spectrum from completely natural regeneration to an assisted process and to planting, depending on the levels of need. And one of the sort of key indicators of success of this work has been that since work began on this active management process, there hasn't been a fire in the landscape within the ecosystem restoration concession for the last 7 years, which is a really important indicator of progress. Speaking to the community point, this is critical. Evidently, this is a privately financed and privately managed area, so it doesn't qualify in the sense of being sort of recognizing that it's not a community-led process in contrast to the example that I'm going to present later, but it's very much a process which is working directly with communities, engaging with them, ensuring that they retain rights of access and harvest of selected non-timber forest products, for example, receiving support to develop no-fire agriculture practices and access to other livelihoods opportunities. Also employment as well, very much 80% of the employment on the restoration concession is coming from the local community. So it's a different dynamic in terms of community engagement, but it's a very constructive and positive one, which is clearly critical from our point of view in terms of recognizing what it takes to secure the local legitimacy and the support and the sustainability and of approach, quite apart from the ethics of it, of course. I do want to contrast this with a different model as well. So taking from an ecosystem restoration concession where you can take an entire peatland area and conserve it under a single governance structure. Here we're looking at village forests or hutandesa, which is a model that FFI has worked with now for many years. We started working on hutandesa back in 2009 when the legislation was first passed in Indonesia, which grants the rights of communities to apply for a village forest license where their customary rights are recognized under a 30-year management regime. So this is an area that we worked in. It's called Pematanggadung. It spans 3 community areas, and the peatland forests in this landscape, a vast majority of which is in excess of 3 meters, so it's on deep peat. And these are and representing some parts of 3 different peat domes, critically important from a carbon storage point of view, also a vital habitat for orangutan, one of the highest densities of orangutan in that landscape. So we worked with communities to help them to secure the area licenses for village forests so that they could have recognition of these customary forest areas. And then working with the village institutions or the village forest institutions to support them to build their capacity to manage these areas. This work is now being taken forward by International Animal Rescue, which is another fantastic organization working in West Kalimantan, supporting the ongoing work and looking at not only how the tenure clarification process can be progressed into active management, but also how the livelihoods of those communities can be supported and enriched, because the tenure clarification is an incentive in its own right. It's a very important thing. This idea of being displaced potentially by the sort of without Hutandesa scenario here was palm oil, and there was a high potential of that. Communities elected to go down that route. I think that is the sort of sense of control and empowerment in that is very important, but it's not enough to endure in terms of incentive. There has to be economic opportunity that comes along with that. And this is a very interesting example because we can see that now in the present time, we've got 2 communities that are very much actively persisting with the village forest management and its work going forward, and another community that is still or is now under is looking for other economic opportunities. And I think that this really highlights an interesting point, that you've got hydrological systems in peat, which are very fragile, which are very much connected. Drainage in one area can very much affect wider areas. And when you've got different governance systems, you have to really focus on ensuring that there's great alignment across the boards to get a holistic management of these areas. But it's not to say it's not the right thing to do in many ways, because there's fantastic things that can be done if you can get this win-win right. And I just want to reflect, this is not a peatland landscape, but it's a good example of how the village forest model can be scaled and what can be achieved. There are communities in the Kerinci Seblat landscape, which is a tiger-rich area. It's one of the last strongholds of the Sumatran tiger from a very sort of strategic, significant population size. FFI has been working on village forests with local partners, with our close collaboration with the Ministry of Forestry and Environment and local civil society. And to date, we've engaged with, we can see the figures, 83 villages, many thousands of people involved, with lots of active community-based management of these forest areas, creating essentially a de facto buffer zone around Kerinci Seblat National Park in key areas. Fundamental to that is the longevity of engagement. It's well understood now through increasing research and publications in the space that it takes a good 5 to 10 years to really build up the governance capacity to ensure that communities can not only take ownership of the rights of forest management, but then to have the capacity to transform these rights into opportunities and to real well-being benefits. And so just emphasizing the significance of the time that needs to be invested in these things. So just sort of reflecting on that, this is some of the livelihoods work that we've been doing with communities in that landscape, coffee, other initiatives, but also looking at payment for ecosystem service models as well as a mechanism. And it's a nice image of a Sumatran tiger, which has been taken from one of the village forest camera trap surveys. So just a few very brief reflections. I know we're running short on time. There is an increasing role of rural communities in deforestation. This runs counter to a sort of a very important narrative around the role of communities as guardians of these areas. And I think it's really important to state that the local people, local communities, indigenous peoples have a critical role to play, but they have to be empowered and supported and resourced to play that role. It's not that that isn't a desired role, it's that it needs to be resourced and enabled. If there aren't development opportunities, if there isn't finance reaching the places that really matter, then it can be very difficult to realize in practice. So I think it's the rights-based approaches in this area are vital, but we just need to recognize that all the climate finance that we're talking about, all the commitments that are being announced, they've got to get to the places where they really matter. And I think that's an area we're very heavily focused on. The implications of peatland ecosystems for governance and management, peatland's delicate, it's complex, it is a bit more challenging to manage than a mineral soil forest. I think we need to reflect on that and really see how sort of the holistic approaches to management and the sort of the integrated model, it just requires extra effort, and it also requires extra costs because some of those are greater. But of course, the gains are also that much greater because they are so rich in carbon, and really securing those areas is just critical. And then I've made this point already, but beyond recognition of rights, it's really about building capacity to translate those rights into improvements on well-being. That's what's going to drive the long-term changes of behavior, the sustainable land use management that's going to ensure that these areas really endure in practice in the long term. There's some interesting research out which does sort of assess the progress of social forestry in Indonesia. Very big targets set back in 2014 to rapidly scale up allocation of forest lands to hutan desa. And some of it's successful and some of it is less successful. And a lot of the less successful examples sort of illustrate are where there's been a focus on the tenure clarification process, but not on the follow-up and the sort of enduring commitment to building capacity for long-term management. And that's a resourcing issue. That is a time and sort of commitment issue. And I think that's another thing that we need to really reflect on in terms of sort of working to support the government and civil society in making these things work and endure for the long term. And yeah, so that's my sustainable finance point again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Completely fascinating case studies, actually. Really bringing to life, I guess, the complexity and the various layers that we need to address here. So our next speaker is Ben McCarthy, works for the National Trust as Head of Nature Conservation, Restoration, Ecology. We love big titles in the National Trust. Going to talk to us about, well, what really is our message to COP in terms of what role nature and peat will play.
Do I need this? Don't need it. Okay, I'll put that down. Well, it's great to be here at COP for all the chaos and excitement of the event and the distractions that people online are most probably oblivious to. It's great also to be on a panel with such great experts and to hear that kind of insight. And it would be amiss of me actually not to take a moment to kind of just acknowledge and celebrate actually the fact that we're here at COP talking about peatland conservation, not only internationally but also here in the UK. And it's the UK experiences that I want to reflect on, and really to talk a bit about how we in the National Trust have kind of hardwired nature-based solutions into our response to both the dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And of course, as our favourite Sir David Attenborough made the point earlier this week, we need to tackle both issues, and indeed nature-based solutions do just that. So I want to briefly reflect on our work with some of the major landowners in the UK, where we're rallying to secure action to restore peatlands on the ground, to meet the challenge set out by the UK Committee on Climate Change that we need to transform land use and land management to reduce emissions and increase sequestration. And I'll give a couple of examples of how we've been working to restore our own peatlands, to restore in seeking to deliver nature-based solutions. And finally, yes, that message to COP about how nature-based solutions need to be central to our collective response to the changing climate. So I don't need to dwell on the impacts of climate change, but needless to say, it's been having an impact across all of the National Trust's interests, be that the direct impacts of extreme temperature has had on our visitors, our staff and our volunteers, or the extreme weather events that have been impacting on the historic buildings and the important collections we house there. And of course, we've been seeing our coastlines literally collapsing into the sea, increased flooding, and of course changes to the species, habitats and ecosystems that we care for across our significant estate. So at the Trust, we're responding to such impacts with, I think, demonstrable urgency, with a net zero commitment for 2030 and a commitment to restore nature across much of our estate. And this work has got multiple facets and it reflects some of the principles that we've already heard about. First and foremost, decarbonising our financial investments as well as our business operations to fundamentally reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Across our estate, we're looking to transform our land use and already have mature adaptation strategies, for example, shifting shores along our coastlines, plans to establish 20,000 hectares of new native broadleaf woodlands, and creating and restoring 25,000 hectares of wildlife-rich habitats. And peatland, of course, is within that mix. We're seeking support from other major landowners, such as the Church of England, the Duchy of Cornwall, the Countryside Landowners and Business Association, as well as protected landscapes and some private estates, such as Holcombe Estate in Norfolk, to secure their commitment to work with us to transform our land-based economy to deliver nature-based solutions. And it's a step I hope we can all take together in support of the government's ambitions set out in its 25-year plan for the environment. And we need to see those plans reflected in clear, demonstrable and monitored delivery plans across all 4 nations of the UK. So where does peatlands fit into this mix? Well, we're proud custodians of about just a little short of 18,000 hectares of peatland, mainly blanket bogs in the uplands, where historic management, especially drainage, overgrazing and burning, but also more recently things like nitrogen deposition, has left about 70% of it in a degraded state. Whilst this natural depository represents our largest carbon stock, with carbon densities akin to tropical forests that we hear so much about, it's also our second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And as Ollie has already made the point, we can no longer afford to have these sites bleeding carbon and greenhouse gases. So we're therefore very focused on re-wetting these sites to reduce the greenhouse emissions and return these internationally important habitats into the natural carbon capture systems that they are. I want to touch on 3 brief partnerships that we're doing this through. First of all, our partnership with Yorkshire Water, which is where we're working to restore peatlands across West Yorkshire to deliver cleaner water, reduce flood risk, as well as restoring these upland landscapes into a rich mosaic of active blanket bog, wet and dry heath, woodland, grassland mosaics. Our partnership with Moors for the Future on Holcombe Moor has transformed this moorland plateau near Manchester into a giant sponge by building thousands of peat bunds to tackle the effects of climate change. And working with our tenant farmers, we've been reducing the grazing pressure and built close to 1,000 dams of every sort you can imagine to slow the flow of both surface and groundwater running off the plateau. And we've complemented this with nigh on 1 million sphagnum plugs to reduce the risk of flooding downstream. And whilst it's too early for us for our monitoring to quantitatively pick up the impact this has had, our qualitative assessments suggest it has indeed reduced flooding downstream earlier this year. The final example I want to give of some of our peatland restoration is that in the Peat District, where we've been working with partners such as the RSPB to restore previously degraded peatland. We've got bare peat being blown in the winds, losing its interest and with it its carbon. And through an extensive and very strategic approach, we've been grip blocking, dam building of every type of dam imaginable, and we've been revegetating bare peat. These restoration projects combined have been very successful. It's demonstrated what can be done in putting the degraded blanket bog on a positive restoration trajectory, and we've developed a whole range of techniques. And the challenge now is to transfer this learning and this experience to other landowners and other sites to both increase the extent of active restoration as well as the pace of restoration, which reflects the nature and climate emergencies. So what is the message we need to put out to COP26 for nature? I think the first and foremost is to ensure that the UK is credible in its as a world leader and its presidency of the COP. We need to see that further action for nature and climate, both at home as well as internationally. And this includes the government support of effective, high-quality, nature-based solutions to climate change through environmental land management schemes as well as effective regulation. We need to see government commitment to restoring 100% of our peatlands, recognising the rate of return on investment that their own Office of National Statistics has set out, and Ollie checked earlier. And we need to make urgent action to bring a ban on the use of horticultural peat that I know is going to be picked up by Stuart. We also formally need to recognise that keeping global temperatures to no more than 1.5 degrees is impossible without investing in the protection and restoration of nature. We need to see nature anchored into the decision text adopted by COP this year to drive investment and rapid, urgent action on the ground. We need to see that nature is reflected in each nation's NDCs so that its potential to capture both carbon as well as deliver nature's recovery and wider societal benefits are realised. And finally, we need to lay a solid foundation for global ambition to tackle the nature and climate crisis together. Thank you.
So thank you, Ben. The images there, I stood and literally planted sphagnum moss on the bottom for the grass. It was one of those things that you think when you're planting something that size, how could it possibly make a difference? But of course, if you've got thousands and thousands of them, it does. So 2 more speakers. We're moving to Stuart Brooks, who is Head of Conservation and Policy at NbS, but also here with another hat on, which is obviously Chair of the International Union for Conservation of Nature in the UK. Stuart, you're here to talk to us mostly about horticulture, but the broader question of use of peat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilary, and thanks Ben and Zoe and Natalie as well. Yeah, so we're going to kind of take a slightly different tack now, and I'm going to talk about a different aspect of demonstrating success around delivering a nature-based solution, which is peatlands, and that's the kind of story of horticultural peat. So I've been around this story and peatland conservation for nearly 25 years now, and it's a kind of slightly depressing story in some way from the kind of horticultural side. But from the kind of other aspects of it, things have really changed. You know, we're standing here in this peatland pavilion at a global climate COP, and I couldn't have envisaged that 25 years ago. You know, everybody's now kind of understood and recognized the value of peatlands and their contribution to both climate and biodiversity issues. So recognition is well and truly there. You know, President of the United States of America mentioned peatlands in the same breath as he did forests. So we're kind of getting there. So that's changed and that's good. We're on a good trajectory, I think. But there's one area that we really do need to close the loop on, and that's the use of peat in horticulture. So maybe what hasn't changed in that regard. Governments have been making commitments to either phase out or ban the use of peat in horticulture now for as long as I've been involved in this. And we still hear some very kind of positive words around the intention there, but we're still kind of yet to see some concrete action on that front. We've got some brilliant voices out there. Monty Don, every time he's on the TV, he talks about peat-free. And whenever he says that, I think, yeah, go Monty. And, you know, a lot of people are kind of speaking up about it. So I think people do know. Having said that, I was on my social media last night showing my mum what I've been doing here. And she keeps saying, well, I keep telling all my friends about this and they don't know anything about it. So I think we've still got to get the message out, and hopefully people like Monty Don can help us do that. But we can do it. And that's a kind of fundamental message, I think. And this is really about demonstrating success. We can do it. So the National Trust for Scotland and the National Trust in England, Wales and Northern Ireland are doing it. We're managing all of our gardens on a peat-free basis, and we have done that for a long time. And that, I think, is the kind of one of the key messages that we really kind of need to get out and communicate. Peat isn't necessary for you to manage a beautiful and a successful garden. We've made a little film, so please, it's only a couple of minutes, and I know you've been kind of sat there for a little while now. There is some drinks coming, by the way, so if you leave now, you're not going to get a drink. So I'd just like to share this very short video with you, and then I've got some kind of key messages to wrap up. Okay, great. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed making it, and organisations like ours, we have millions of members, so we can be leaders. We can encourage people to follow suit, and it's that kind of video, that kind of communication that we can have to people that I can hope inspires them to kind of move from actually what's been quite a short-lived obsession with using peat to gardening in the way that we do without peat. So have we kind of reached a turning point in this story of peat and horticulture? I think not yet is my kind of take on that. So there's been kind of some positive moves over the last 10 plus years in terms of the proportion of peat that's used in compost, and that's the kind of the bars on the graph here. So the proportion of peat in bag compost that you buy in garden centres has kind of come down, but actually the volume of peat that we've been buying, just because of people are now kind of, so many more people are gardening, lockdown hasn't been great for peat. Actually, we've seen a kind of relatively recent uptick in the volume, but if you kind of look, across the line, it's really not come down a great deal over the last kind of 10, 15 years. So we've still got, I think, a lot to do in this regard. And for that reason, the IUCN UK Peatland programme has produced a new document, and so it's called Peat-Free Horticulture Demonstrating Success. So this is kind of one in a series, and we're launching this today at COP26, and it kind of tells the story of peat, and it tells the story of how we can kind of transition away from using peat in our gardens, and lots of case studies in here, and also from industry, really kind of demonstrating how we can transition away from peat to alternatives. So the key messages really in this, which we want to kind of communicate here and beyond, is we don't need to use peat in our gardens. It's unsustainable. We understand the consequences of that. There are absolutely very effective alternatives out there, but we're all kind of in this together. So government, I think, has to kind of step up on its commitments. They've made commitments to kind of phase out and ban the use of peat in the amateur gardening sector in particular. That's 80% of the peat use. And so we really kind of need to turn those kind of nice words into firm commitments, policy and regulation. And the fundamental point, as illustrated by our short video there, was that you can garden without peat extremely successfully. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you to all of the contributions on a really, really fascinating set. So we have a range of questions here, and I'll not take any particular order. Let me see. Possibly Zoe, actually. How would you see the village forest model being adapted for application in developed countries? Do you have any example where similar approaches have been used?
That's a great question. I mean, there are certainly community forestry models in the UK and other developed countries. I'm not going to claim to be an expert in those, but I know there are examples right here in Scotland around governance. And Nat, you may know more examples than I do, but I would say the principles would broadly be applicable anywhere. I think the key things are around an alignment of objectives. I think not all of the parties involved, not all members of communities, not the government, the NGOs, whatever, we don't have to have completely common objectives, but we need to have aligned objectives. You know, the communities that we work with in Indonesia are not profoundly driven by the status of the Sumatran tiger necessarily, but they are profoundly driven by access to the natural resources on which they've had long-term use of. And I think that point around aligned vision and an alliance around what you're trying to achieve is very important. And the mechanisms with which to resource these things as well. I think there are increasing opportunities for communities, cooperatives to come together around how to regenerate, to protect or restore and rewild, as we're seeing a lot of here in Scotland, in a collaborative way. We have a different context in many developing countries. Land rights are often much clearer. And so I think the governance models might look different, but the principles could very much apply.
Thank you. Natalie, can I come to you? I know there's been an awful lot of talk around this. How could we, I mean, and maybe it's actually for both of you, in fact, all of you, how could we support private or corporate funding for peatland restoration? I know there's been a lot of work done around this as to how to get private money into this kind of work. Who would like to take that? Maybe Stuart, yeah?
Okay, thank you. Happy to take that. So we've actually seen a huge amount of interest from the private sector looking to invest in, we obviously saw a kind of big wave in terms of kind of people wanting to invest in trees. Everybody got that quite early on, and now people are kind of wising up to the contribution that peatland can make. So there do need to be some safeguards in there. And actually the IUCN UK program has developed a code, a peatland code, which is kind of based on science. So we understand what emission factors we might generate from particular types of damaged peatland to a restored peatland. And that can be authenticated and verified. So I think there needs to be kind of very good understanding of the science and tight kind of regulation and management around that. And I think that actually gives the investors and business confidence as well, that they're actually getting a return for their investment.
How far away do you think we are from getting to that point where it is packaged, for the want of a better word?
It's kind of already there, to be honest. And there's kind of different levels, I would say, of investment. And the really kind of good investment that I think we want businesses to make are where they're investing in kind of carbon plus, really. So it's not just the carbon that they're buying to offset, it's actually the biodiversity and the very positive impacts that we have on people's lives as part, and for them to be kind of feel like they're making a contribution and part of that kind of whole package. But yeah.
Would you like to build on that, Zoe?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can see many examples of it. You know, the finance commitments that are being made today, that the private sector finance ambitions that were announced in relation to the commitment to halting deforestation by 2030. The private sector has a very significant role to play in this. Net zero cannot be achieved without investments in nature. They need to be happening as the guidelines would absolutely dictate, alongside very fundamental decarbonisation. But investment in nature and the role that nature-based solutions in supporting the private sector to get through that transition process to net zero is key. And there is a lot of private finance out there ready to be deployed into high-quality nature-based solutions. I think the critical thing is ensuring that there's a real commitment to integrity, and that alongside the carbon metric, which is the net zero driver, that it's really focused on high-quality biodiversity outcomes and high-quality social outcomes.
Good, thank you. There are a couple of questions here about how do we actually, to your point, Stuart, how do we get more people, the public, to know about this? How do we get them excited? How do we get them engaged? There's a number of questions here that are in the same sort of category. What things could we all, and you're all from different types of organisations, what could we do to engage the public in the reality of the importance of this and why it matters? Yeah, actually.
I think involving the public is the critical thing. A lot of people say all this makes sense, but how can I personally get involved with it? You know, and I think there's a lot of great work, but it's about bringing school children, bringing local community members in the implementation of it. So there's the implementation involvement, but then there's the involvement in the initial consultation project that brings together the different stakeholders in the landscape, the local community groups, the local business, the farmers, all those different entities. And if they're involved if they're at the table right from the beginning, then they have a significant interest, investment in the outcome. So you've got those two things, I think, involving them in both the design and the implementation. And there's some great examples of that happening around the UK and elsewhere in the world.
There is, and I certainly know from my own experience in our organisation, there's lots of work going on. And yet, to go to your case study, I guess, Stuart, of your mum, how come when Monty Don says it's still not sinking in? Is there anything else? Is there, maybe Catherine, given your experience across the National Trusts internationally. Any examples of where we've done something specific that's made a real difference? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, if it's okay just to go off piece slightly, we've got another member actually of the Into family here, Ian from Antashka, and I think Ian's maybe got a little something to offer.
Well, delighted to be here from Ireland. There's a few of us. We're a sister national trust, so it's great. We meet at the COPs every year. We've also had a major turnaround. Ireland has been a basket case for peat for years. And as a result of a legal action taken by us, as well as another organisation, Friends of the Irish Environment, the entire legal regime for peat extraction in Ireland was found to have been breach of EU law. We've very much welcomed the support of EU law on habitats and on environmental assessment. So there's been a dramatic exit from peat strategy, from peat extraction by the state company Bord na Móna for power generation, for domestic heating and for horticulture. So that's good news, but of course it causes a crisis in the domestic and horticultural peat sector. But as was said, most of the peat demand is going into the stuff sold in garden centres, potted plants, in little plastic things that may have a short life or get thrown away. So to complement the really impressive IUCN booklet that's just been cited there, we would like to launch at COP a booklet that we have produced with the support of the Irish Department of Heritage on what, just think of that John F. Kennedy speech, what you can do at home. Remember, we've all been remotely in our gardens causing this awful damage to peatlands in the Irish Midlands or in other places. Now we together can go back to the sort of composting our grandparents did in our gardens, whether urban or rural. So we produced a very attractively illustrated booklet, which is available online. The link for it is on the app, which I gather most of you will have. It was put up this afternoon. You'll also get it on our social media. We're a national trust, but we also have the Irish name Antashka, a tough one to communicate, but it's a multi-meaning word, like so much of the Irish language, and it's about a treasure store, but it's also an active verb about caring or treasuring. So this booklet, which is an online resource, was produced for Ireland, but of course, you know, there's no border between us ecologically in terms of climate, so it's equally applicable to all of Ireland, to Britain, and indeed to other countries with comparable temperate climates to us here in our islands. So I would ask those of you who are into social media to promote this concept, this booklet of going back to home gardening. If you don't have a garden yourself, get involved in a community composting scheme so that compost can go into good use locally, and that takes organic material away from the waste stream also. So there's multiple benefits, and it's a good old-fashioned nature-based a solution. And we're going to be as we're all here together as National Trusts, we're going to be talking about how we can promote this more widely and jointly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the floor? Anybody like come up more here? Anybody else? Sorry, keep forgetting which. No, there was. Yes.
Hi there, Mike Moorcroft, Natural England, also the IPCC. Question for Zoe. How many examples are there of restoration of peat forests in Indonesia?
I don't know. I know of a number of the Ketinggan project is another major one, which just won a WEF award yesterday for incredible success over an extended period of time, connecting peatland conservation with benefits for communities and biodiversity and accessing climate finance over many years. Actual numbers, I couldn't say for sure. Certainly there need to be more.
Stuart, do you want to come in?
Just briefly to say that we had some excellent presentations this morning, actually, practical examples of peaceful forest restoration from Indonesia. He's got his back to us, but the man in a rather nice shirt just over there is the director of the Global Environment Centre based out in Malaysia, and they've done a huge amount of work around supporting locally based restoration programs. And the Indonesian government are here. They were here actually where you're standing, Hilary, yesterday, the environment minister, and they've made some very significant commitments to peatland restoration, and
Interviewed as we speak, so we'll,
all right, okay.
I'm sure anybody would like to talk to him.
Yeah.
But it was just going to bring you in. I lost my questions, but basically it was challenging, and I've had several conversations about this today. How can we inspire the really major landowners, private landowners? So we're all talking here, as representatives of institutions, and to some degree it's easier for us. What about the big private sector owners? How can we inspire them? Because particularly in the UK, there's actually a lot of them, and in many ways, my experience is that the private sector are actually often moving faster than we are. They don't have the same bureaucracy as we do.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. Well, just to pick up briefly, the point around horticulture, I think there's a huge role for industry and commercial operators simply to stop stocking peat in horticulture. It's not difficult. We've got decadal, we've had targets and banning horticulture, peat in horticulture for decades, and we're not making any progress. But as to changing the land use, land management of some of our peatlands, I think in the uplands it's absolutely critical that we have a good blend of stronger regulation, which is more effectively enforced by the statutory agencies, but also critically rewarding land managers, owners, for the public benefit that active peatlands so clearly deliver. And we've heard from both Ollie's presentations and other speakers about what the kind of double the win-win opportunities that active healthy peatlands do, not only for carbon but for biodiversity, as well as other wider kind of ecosystem services in terms of reduced flood risk, increased water quality and things. And so rewarding and having in place a system which rewards land managers for those public benefits, I think is going to be key.
Great. I'm just going to finish on, because I think one of the really strong things that came out, so we've talked a lot about peat, we've talked a lot about nature and carbon and climate. Actually, the strong thing that came through is this is good for people. And certainly one of the really, I think, binding themes, particularly in your case study, Zoe, was the sense of the need for community understanding and buy-in and actually fundamental delivery. Is there anything else that we can learn out of these case studies that you've heard that actually are missing today? How do we really get that fundamental principle of engagement to apply? Natalie, do you want to say anything more that we've learned, or that through your experience you say we really need to drive harder?
Well, on that particular point is that the projects that have long-term sustainability are the ones that are being designed and implemented by or in partnership with those local communities. And I think it's important to recognise that many of these communities all over the world have been working with nature for millennia to deal with climate change impacts or climate variability, right? And we need to support those communities to scale up and to scale out. And also, some parts of the world have been subject to variable conditions for a long time, and they're actually quite good at dealing with it. Other parts of the world, and this is actually one of them, we're used to things being the same. We have our seasons, but they've been, up until recently, they've been fairly predictable. So there's a real opportunity for south-north, south-south, north-south learning, and to sort of, create those platforms and opportunities to share that. Yeah.
Ollie, can you hear me? Have you?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I think during lockdown, it's widely reported that there's been a large reconnect with nature. And Natalie said other people do this in different parts. So we've actually forgotten how to do that. And actually visiting National Trust sites this summer, it's great to see your posters that say, I think something along the lines of people need nature. So we've started a discussion that actually we can widen into lots of different areas. to get nature-based solutions as the primary way that we should be starting to think about doing things. So perhaps we've actually turned a corner there, and we have a resource that we can actually now build upon through through the year and a half that we've all been through and realised how important nature is to us.
I would agree with that. Certainly in the National Trust, we've seen 4 and 5 times higher numbers than we would have ever had in our outdoor sites, and that the starting point of nature is actually a really, really easy place for people to start to engage with why these things matter. So have you anything to finish on that particular point before I close?
I don't think specifically. I think we see the potential. Let's just keep building on that. There's a lot of momentum behind people and nature and the connection, whether that's with Indigenous peoples and local communities or here, sort of thinking day to day about how we engage with nature and reconnect with something that we've become so distant from in this country, I think, at least. So, yeah, let's recognize that and build on it as fast as we can.
Thank you. And then any final closing remarks from each of you? Natalie.
Just wanted to say something about nature-based solutions in cities, because we've all sort of been talking about the wildlands and the rural areas, but 80% of the world's population are going to be living in cities by the end of the century, and there are many brilliant ways of bringing nature into cities in a way that doesn't increase inequalities, that reconnects people, that improves their mental health. And I think all the work that's going on in that space, there's all sorts of organisations that are bringing nature into cities, is really helping with that. So I think that's a big part of the solution as well. Not to have, nature isn't something that the wealthy middle class can access. It's something that's close to everyone. So I want to flag that. And that's actually one of the 3 films that we're releasing on Saturday, is about how you bring nature into cities and the benefits that it brings people right across the board.
Completely agree with that. We've got some amazing projects going ourselves about that, but there's something about not just nature in pockets, but corridors, people and nature able to move. So any final thoughts as we close the session?
I think, just to say, I think we've seen some fantastic commitments already in relation to forests. I think, clearly a lot of forests are on peatlands, but we've got very important peatlands that aren't forested as well. Let's look to how the protection of all pristine ecosystems, and that has, I think, the point around what a good nature-based solution is and where we need to be prioritizing. Let's make sure we secure what we've got left. That's got to be the top priority.
Thank you. Ben?
Just to kind of build on the comments really, and say that it's great that nature, the fundamental role of nature in our well-being and societal health is finally being recognised, and the more it's up front and central, the better.
Thank you. Ollie, can I come to final comments?
Thank you. Let's get on and really ramp up the scale of peated restoration. It's one of the easier things that we can do to address climate change. Let's get on with it and do it for nature and for people as well.
Thank you. Catherine, we haven't heard a lot in your role representing all of the wonderful people across the MTs. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, thank you. So I'm not a peat expert,
Nope.
but one of the things we do at Into is bring people together. So it's been fabulous to have you all here and to exchange ideas and to see examples of wonderful solutions around the world, and to share these with you all and our audience online. I wanted to add on the engaging people side. Intu's also released some videos created some videos for COP, showing what our national trusts around the world are doing to combat climate change and show how what we do works for people and nature, and whether that's mangrove protection in the Cayman Islands or reforestation projects in St Helena, habitat restoration in Somerset is in one of the videos, looking after the urban trees in South Australia, and mitigating the effects of climate change using traditional knowledge in Uganda. There's lots of things going on. They are, like you were saying, they are a bit pockety at the moment. So if we can all get behind that, that would be great. And I think the fact that 19 of our national trusts around the world have signed on to this peat statement today, I think is really exciting, that they have committed to talking to their members about it and urging them to stop using peat in their gardens, and to urge their governments to do to come up with the ban. So, you know, there's lots going on, and it's really exciting. So.
But there is something, there's definitely a theme here about us actually being greater than the sum of our parts. There's so much exciting work going on around the world, actually, about how we get that to come together. Stuart, I'm going to come to you for the final message, because you, I mean, we are all very grateful that you actually have hosted this venue today. And I think it's been a really interesting and helpful conversation. But final thoughts?
Yeah, just three quick things. Firstly, thank you. Thank you for your contributions here. It's been really good. Thanks to all the people in the audience here, but actually, really importantly, the people who can't be in this space, which is, I think, the most devoid of nature kind of zone anywhere on the planet, or even a view of nature. So thanks to everybody who's kind of out there online. People have been asking me, you know, what's my message from COP, you know, particularly around peatlands, and we know it's important. We know how to fix it, and we know what to do. We just need to get on and kind of upscale it, and that's kind of repeating what Ollie said. And I guess I should send a message to my mum to say, please let all your friends know that they shouldn't be using peat in their gardens. And if Monty Don's listening, please kind of give us a kind of a big shout out really for peat-free gardening.
Great. Thank you very much, panelists, and thank you for listening. We'll all be around if you'd like to ask us any more questions afterwards. Thank you very much.